budget gaming builds. Kind of hard to do right now. I'm looking at you, graphics cards, but I got one put together for you guys, an under $250 build. Let's get into it. So I set out a while ago to put together another budget computer, but this time trying to go a different route than one I did. So the original basis I had for this was an HP Z400, and again, I already had experience with that, and that was for my little brother's under $300 i7 build, and that was it's still going strong today, but it changed hands and somebody else has got it, and it's got a 6-core in it now. Really cool that that socket can do that. If you guys want to see more on that video, to be linked right up here. And so let's talk about it a little bit. I got an HP Z400, used parts, eBay. That's a good place to go for this sort of stuff. Not so much for graphics cards. They're priced through the roof right now. But eBay got me this HP Z400 with a 250 gig hard drive, 8 gigs of DDR3 RAM, and with its power supply, everything basically, an entire ready to go unit for $100, $100. Got this system. Now the processor in it wasn't the greatest processor. It was a dual core Xeon, whatever. It wasn't even hyper-threading one, kind of weird. But from that original build, I had taken out the W3550, the original one I mentioned, and that was just collecting dust. That's the same as an i7-950, not the most terrible processor. So I actually threw that into this one and added a little bit of RAM. Again, so I had some leftover RAM from back then, and we brought that up to 12 gigs of RAM, 4-core, 8-thread CPU, and that turbo's up to about 3.1 gigahertz, I think. Not the greatest, but pretty good for a budget build. Now the hard part came looking for a graphics card. Ooh, man. That was tough, and I'm still dealing with the PayPal transaction issue now. Not because of PayPal, just because a guy tried to scam me for a GTX 960 4 gig for 110 bucks, which personally to me I think is a little high for a GTX 960 considering what prices they were going for before the mining craze took over. Whatever, I digress. Locally, I ended up finding a MSI Gaming GTX 960 4 gig for the same price that I found it on through the other way. And well, I did have to make a little bit of a drive for it. The person though ended up being a bit late, and my original offer to him was $100. He came back down to that as a way to make up for it. I had to wait half an hour for him. Wasn't that big a deal, honestly, but really nice of him to do that for me. And I think that's a decent deal on a GTX 960. And the reason I went with the 960 instead of like a 770, for example, which I could find around the same price, maybe lower, was that this I'm gonna keep using the power supply that came with the Z400, because then I wouldn't have to make the adapter that I talked about in that video and save myself a lot of time. But problem there was that it's only a 475 watt unit, and the 770 is kind of thirsty. So a GTX 960 fits much better into the power envelope. This one uses a single 8-pin, so I used well, kind of a weird adapter setup because I happen to have these adapters lying around. 2 Molex to a single 6-pin, and the power supply already had a single 6-pin on it, so then I put those into a 8-pin adapter, and well, looking like that worked out pretty good. So let's roll the benchmarks. there you have it. There are the benchmarks, and the system, what can I say, does pretty good for a budget build, right? But it was not without its issues. Now, the case that it went in, you guys may have seen it in our video that'll be linked right up here. That's the Raidmax Gama case. Thanks again to Raidmax for sending this out. It's going to find a new home, and it's going to be a really good home for it. So the Raidmax Gama has a power supply enclosure that's designed for a standard size ATX power supply. Well, I found out the hard way that this Z400 power supply is not a standard size ATX power supply. It's too tall. So I had to get creative. And I made it fit.
That's what she said.
And it worked out. It's not quite the prettiest solution if you look at it from the back, but overall you can't tell, and it works great. Did have to use a few extensions as well, so if you guys do this with the Z400 and you take it out of the case that it comes with, you're gonna need a power supply ATX 24-pin extension and a 4-pin power supply extension as well for the CPU power. And with those two, you should be okay. Now, depending on how your layout is, you might need extensions for all of your cables, but fortunately you can get kits with all that. They're not all that expensive. And if you're gonna do that, you might as well dress it up with a sleeve kit, make it look a little nicer. We threw a Gamax 300 on there, $13 on Amazon. I may be going this way as a budget cooler instead of like a Hyper 212 or anything like that, you know, going forward, because it seems to do pretty good for this pretty thirsty processor. Keeps it in check, and well, I mean, it has a blue fan, so if you guys are after a blue theme, pretty common, the fan will go with it. I believe the fan is also available in red. So again, that's a deep cool Gamax 300. If you want to check that out, I'll have a link in the description below to the Amazon page. $13 is not terrible for a 3 heat pipe cooler, and it's really easy to mount to the Intel too. It doesn't have a back plate or anything like that. You just put the clips, you put the little plates on it that have the clips, and you push them through. It's a little push pin one. So some people like that, some people don't, but at least it makes it really easy. And if you wanted to do an in-place upgrade with this cooler, you just throw it in there. You don't have to take the motherboard out, put a back plate, or whatever the case is. You just click it right in. And that's only if you're going to be taking the Z400 motherboard out of its case. So there's that. So there are a few other things that if you do this with a Z400 that you have to do in order to get it to boot properly, and that's to jump a certain USB header, that's to make sure you have a PWM fan connected to the rear fan, rear 4-pin header, and to ground out the 5th pin on the CPU header. And it's all pretty simple stuff to do, at least once you know what you're doing with it, and it's a lot more straightforward if you're not having to make an adapter for the PSU. If you guys want more details on all that sense pin stuff and bypassing all that stuff, make sure you check out the video I mentioned before, because there's a lot of info there in the description and the comments, stuff like that. That's it. This is a budget build. Kept it under 250 bucks. Ideally was trying to stay at $200, but a few adapters here and there, having to upgrade the cooler, things like that, drove the price up just a bit, but I think it's a lot of bang for your buck on this one. GTX 960, it's honestly like the MSI one, that looks great. It looks way better than what its performance is, sure, but it looks good in the build, I gotta say. So if you guys like this video, click that like button, subscribe, we always got more coming, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.